Well, replacement is in part Invest in SA, which is a body which will bring in some private sector expertise about speaking to investors. We think that's going to be a powerful and important change there. It's led by Kevin Osborne, Deputy Chair of the EDB. That will be an important part of that. And the other thing is that we've really mainstreamed innovation. We've created a new department of manufacturing, innovation, trade, resources and energy. So innovation is now front and centre in our major economic agency. So I'd like to see innovation really be the byword of everything we do in the public sector. I think we do need a cultural change in our public sector, but not just our public sector, our private sector and our non-government sector. We can't just have some of our private sector institutions just plodding on in the same way as they always have, with a very narrow base of customers, just hoping that global conditions won't change. We need fast-moving, agile enterprises in all of our sectors so that we can respond to a changing world. One thing we do know about this world now is that it's changing and changing rapidly, and what we want to be is a resilient state. And to be resilient, you've always got to be on the move. And I think that culture of innovation, which I think is one of the hallmarks of our education system, is something that we want to build on. There's a lot of talk about basic skills, but there's another basic skill I think you need, and that's the capacity to adapt. And innovation, I think, is at the heart of that. And I think our schools do very well with that.
Cultural change in the public sector would send a few shivers down a few corridors. What do you mean by that term?
Well, I tell you what I don't mean. I don't mean cost cutting, and I don't mean conditions cutting or staffing cutting. I mean, we've got some savings targets we want to meet. We've got to take the edge off the growth in the public sector so that we can meet the needs that we have to without calling on the taxpayers for more contributions. But within that, because there isn't going to be massive extra amounts of revenue, we're going to have to do things differently. So we're going to have to get more out of our public sector. And I think that there is a lot of energy in the public sector. It's just a question of releasing it, and we're doing a lot of thinking about how we can do that. But it will be evolutionary. It's not going to be a revolutionary thing, and it won't involve a slash and burn approach to the public sector.
If you go back 10 years ago, when you first started as a minister in this Labor government, the number of public servants, I think from memory, was about 79,000. It's now 101,000. If it kept pace with population movement, it would be 90,000. We're about 10,000 over. The explanation for that, according to Professor Finlay at the University of Adelaide, is that health demands and the health sector has pushed that up. If you try and cut that level of growth in the public sector, do you do so at the risk of putting some further brakes on an economy that at the moment can't afford it?
Yeah, look, that's a good question. I mean, I think what we've seen is there's no doubt that there's a massive growth in the number of doctors, nurses and allied health professionals in our system, and that reflects the changing composition of our demographic. Older people demand more health services, and the demands there are enormous. And you just can't shut hospital doors. You just have to meet those demands. They're just not something that's negotiable. We've tried to find ways of containing those costs, but it's difficult. There is a certain amount of them that are built into the system. It's meant that other parts of government have had to essentially respond by reducing their growth. So what we saw in the last figures that were just published is that the absolute numbers had actually fallen for the first time in some time. So the absolute growth that we've seen for some time has actually tailored off. But that's meant that other parts of government have had to really shrink, if you like, to meet those growing demands in those areas. I mean, we're still growing, of course, our other areas of beyond health, like community services, are also growing at extraordinary rates. And we continue to grow our police numbers. So other parts of government are having to make accommodations, if you like, for that growth. There's no doubt about that.
So it's almost a reorganisation as opposed to a cultural change.
Well, no, I mean, I suppose what I'm talking about is something different. I mean, we have to manage, if you like, those budget pressures about the growing demands of health and community services. I'm talking about almost the imperatives that are now caused by that. That is, how do we do different things with the same or less resources? Now, you can't do that unless you actually decide to do things differently, and that involves cultural change. It means that when you want to do something new, you don't just ask for more money to do it. You look carefully at what you're doing already, and that's tough because there are no programs people would say are pointless, and often they've been in place for a long time, and change is threatening.